Hello and welcome to Mr. Scicluna's painting class for turning a shape into a form. This will be our final product that we accomplish in this lesson, but first I'm going to go through the necessary materials that you will need for this project, starting with a ruler, pencil, blank 9x12 watercolor paper, glass of water with an assortment of different brushes, preferably something with a thin tip for detail and a thicker tip for covering bigger spaces, paper towel or something like a rag to dry and clean your brush, and of course your paints, whether it be watercolor or acrylic. And here we go. First thing you're going to want to do is take your ruler and map out a 1/2 inch border across your paper. To do that, you're going to start by marking in the 1/2 inch area on one side, making a dot at the bottom on this side, making a dot at the bottom on that side, pulling your ruler across and connecting the dots. And then follow that same process all the way around your paper. Now, after you have your border, you want to create the actual shape in which you're going to draw. In my case, I'm going to do a sphere, and I want that sphere to be 1/3 the size of the internal space in this picture frame. Once again, I'll do the technique that I did with the color wheel, which is using the area of my pinky right here, setting it in the center of where I want my circle to be, and then spinning my paper and letting my pencil drag along almost in a compass effect. So I don't really have an exact space or size that I'm set on, so I'll just start going. The sphere's a little large, but that's okay. And then, after I have my sphere in the center, well, at this point, circle, I want to create a background and a foreground, and to do that, I'm going to make a horizon line. And it doesn't really matter where I put it. I guess I'll just put it kind of equal right in the center. I'm not measuring how, perfectly. I'm just kind of eyeing it, and I'm just going to draw the horizon line in the background. And what that does is it separates basically the heaven from the earth, or the wall in the background from the table. This allows me to create a different color background and also the cast shadow and make a more pop by creating shadows on the table. So now that I have my shape drawn in, my horizon line, I'm going to imagine where I want my light source to come from. This time I think I'll switch it up. I usually always do light coming from the left. This time I'll try it from the right. And if I look back to some of the pictures on which the way light reflects off of a sphere, I know that the light's going to hit at one point. This will be my highlight area. forgive me if you can't see, I'm drawing a little bit light because we are using watercolor and it won't be able to cover it with its transparency. And then I know that in this same ellipse right here, the shape of this highlight, I'm gonna try to mimic that. And this will be my shadow area that kind of starts where the light's wrapping around. And in here will be my midtones, down here will be my shadows. And from there, if I know that my light is hitting here, my cast shadow will follow behind that. Somewhere like that. There we go. So if you recall, this is what I call mapping out what you're going to be doing so that you know where the highlight's going to be, your shadow, your cast shadow. Now everything's laid out as much as I need it to be. The next step will actually be choosing the colors in which that I want to paint my shape, the background, and the foreground. I don't particularly mind what colors you use as long as they pop out or don't blend in with one another. For example, if you use a blue center here, don't make the table surface purple. Use something that jumps out against itself. So I think what I'll do is I'll make my circle yellow, and then I'll make my background some type of a blue, and maybe I'll just do primaries, actually. That will be the simplest way for everyone to understand. So I'll start with my circle being yellow. And the way that we're gonna do this is, first you're gonna need to activate your paints. So I'm gonna drop a whole bunch of water in all the paints that I'm gonna use so that it starts activating it and getting it nice and muddy. So after I have my colors stirred in, the way that you want to think of this as layers. You want to do one layer at a time, and you want to build a light to a dark. With watercolor, you can't ever go lighter, you can only go darker. So if I make an area too dark right off the bat, I can't take that away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the darkest area where I know it'll be dark, and I'm just going to start laying in color at that point. Okay, so after you have this first layer in, then that's when I can go in. Now I know it needs to be lighter up here. I'm gonna add some water to my yellow, like we did with the tints, and I'm gonna thin it out a bit, and that's when I'm gonna start pulling up a lighter version from this point. I'm not gonna add more water because I want it to start thinning out and being lighter. And then when I can't pull any more water, all I'm gonna do is add water. And I'm gonna be sure not to paint any yellow past that little highlight circle I made. And then I'm gonna clean my brush so that there's no more yellow on it. And I'm gonna kind of dry some of the water out using my paper towel. And then I'm gonna just spread a little bit of that yellow that I put right around that circle. And then that will be my trend. And because I'm using yellow, it's so bright, it's gonna be a little bit hard to see. So let me pull this up to the camera a little bit. Maybe you can see it a little bit better. Probably not really, but okay. And this will be my first layer for my shape. Now, while that's all drying, I'm not gonna touch it anymore. I'm not gonna keep adding color to it. I'm gonna move on to the next color, and I'll make that the surface of the table, or surface of whatever surface it is. And I think that I'll make the surface of my table blue. So activating my blue, getting my brush in here. And once again, I'm gonna add just that first layer in. Be careful not to be messy like I did just right there and get blue on your... Part of this is just taking your time and not trying to rush. When we try to rush, that's when we make mistakes or it just looks very unfinished. So because we have bigger surface areas, the watercolor will, once it dries, it's gonna start to dry in weird patterns. So your goal with watercolor is always painting fast, but not rushed. And I know that that's contradicting itself, but if we paint fast, we can make the blends look really nice, but if we paint rush, then we make mistakes. We can always add water to reactivate an area or do on the second layer, kind of clean it up. But I'm always constantly trying to make these blends or the surface look as smooth as possible. Okay, that's that area. Add some more water, some more blue. And I'm not painting in the cast shadow area yet because I'm gonna change the color of that anyway. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna paint a nice equal surface area that's not in the shadow first. And if what I was talking about is, see right here, these two areas, they kind of didn't blend right away, so I have to pull my brush into there and kind of activate that area that dried a little bit, and then the area will blend just a little bit nicer. Okay, and there's my one layer of blue right here. Now, for whatever reason on the camera that you're viewing from, it looks green, but it's definitely blue in my eyes. All right, now I'm gonna go into red for the background, making sure that I'm cleaning my brushes every single time. If my water gets too dirty at any point, don't be lazy, go clean it out, because all that murky water will affect your watercolor and kind of contaminate it. So, same with this. Now, if I wasn't giving this demonstration, I would be turning my paper. I would be switching it to make it easier for me to paint. But because I'm trying to give this demonstration, I'm trying to keep it in one direction. So I'm gonna need a lot of red because this is a big area. So I'm constantly, every time I lay in my brush, I'm adding another drop of water into the paint to keep it filled. And the reason why we're switching between each area before adding shadow and things like that is that you want to give that area a chance to rest, and you want to give the paper a chance to recuperate from the water and dry a bit. If you have a blow dryer at home, that works really well for getting an area dry very quickly. Or you just, like I'm doing, switch between areas and add one layer at a time. That way, at any time you finish your third area, since we're working in threes, or 3 zones, your piece could technically be considered finished. Now, I want you to push each one of these areas to like 5 or more layers to really build up shading. But technically, if I were to, after this, I finish this red zone, stop, it could be considered a finished painting. And I like to work that way with all my art pieces, where you get everything in the piece to a certain level, and then you can walk away from it and come back and refine it as you need it. Some artists don't work like that. They do one area and they finish one area at a time, and that's fine. Everyone has a different process. So as you see how I did that, I was pulling the paint out in nice even strokes to minimize all the washout and have a whole bunch of strokes or like a washy, strokey feeling. I'm trying to make it look as evenly blended and smooth as possible. And that you just do that by going slow, and if you see blotchy areas, kind of painting it out and smoothing it out. And then it looks a little bit nicer. If there's an area that seems a little bit light, just add a tiny bit of water, drag the water across the top of the jar or whatever you're using, and just add a little bit of water to that area and blend it in. And that will help blend a little bit better. Okay. And that's one layer for this piece. Oh, actually, it is not one layer. I'm sorry. We still have this cast shadow area. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull some of this water out, and immediately I'm gonna create my first layer of this cast shadow with a tone. So I'm gonna take some of this blue, I'm gonna pull it over here to the side. I'm gonna add a lot more, I'm gonna mix up some more blue real quick, activate it. And then the next thing I wanna do is activate some black. Now remember, I don't want to go too dramatic with this black right away because I want to create different layers. So I'm just adding a tiny bit with the blue. And I'm making kind of my first tone. I'm always trying to make nice, clean edges. So really moving the paper where it benefits the way that I can pull my brush. You never really want to push a brush, you always want to pull a brush. More controlled, and you can create really clean lines that way. All right, now that is one layer finished on this project. So now, for the second layer, I'm gonna go back to that first area, which is the sphere that I started with. And I'm going to start darkening up the shadow area. The first thing I'm gonna do though, is get the deepest saturation of this color in the areas that I want. So I'm really gonna add just a little bit of water, a lot of pigment, and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna make sure that this is the darkest, deepest yellow I can get in this area. And I'm gonna stay on that shadow area because I can always go darker, but I can't go lighter. So I don't wanna drag out a whole bunch of this yellow, but I will paint downwards into the shaded area. And once again, I apologize for making the decision of painting this yellow, as it will be harder to see than if I painted it red or blue. Made a mistake there, but that's okay. You'll still be able to see it for the most part. Okay, so after I know that from the shadow area down, it is the deepest version of this pigment I can get it with the watercolor. I'm gonna just blend it out a little bit. And then once again, I'm gonna thin my yellow by getting all the pigment off my brush and using a watered out version with a little bit of water, a little bit of pigment, and then I'm gonna do one more blend up here in the mid-tones area. And if it starts looking like I'm pulling too much paint, clean your brush, dry your brush, and go back in and pull just the paint that's already there in this area. Don't add more paint. I'm gonna keep doing that, clean my brush, dry my brush, and this is what's called almost dry brushing, even though we are adding water. In acrylic, this would be called dry brushing, where we're constantly cleaning and only spreading around paint with the dry bristles to really get that nice blend. And since it's no more paint's being moved around, I'm gonna add just a little bit of water, or sorry, a little bit of paint to create a nice smoother blend over here. And I'm just slowly doing this to really build up the yellow and make it lighter, a nice smooth light transition into this completely white area. Clean my brush, dry my brush, add a little tiny bit of paint. Nice pull, like nice steady pulls of my brush to blend this as smooth as possible until once again I get to this completely white area and I should have no more paint on my brush. I'm gonna clean my brush just to be safe. Dry my brush, there's a little bit of water on here. And I'm just gonna inside this completely white area. Okay, and that will be my layer 2 for my sphere. So moving on to my floor, or my surface of my table, I want to now make the deepest, darkest blue, but I want to think of it in the sense of where light's hitting. So if light's hitting here, then that means light is also hitting here. So I want to make some of this a little bit lighter, and back here might be a little bit darker. So a cool technique is called, and you have this on like photo editing, it's called vignette. And it's basically making it look like there's darkness moving in from the corners. So I'm just gonna add it's a little bit hard to maneuver around all my cameras. Add a layer of this deep dark blue, and then I'm gonna start blending this out. And I even can just blend it straight into this cast shadow that I already have. And what this second layer is doing is it's smoothing out all those little painting transitional marks that I created on my first time of painting. So, and I'm gonna start only from the edges. If your paint or if your bristles run out of paint, reload the bristles so that you have a nice solid area of paint. And then once again, just start blending that in. Now, in an ideal perfect world, I would have this paper taped, or it would still be attached to something like the book it came in, so that you don't, it's nice and solid while you're doing all these painting strokes. Add a little bit of water by loading your bristles up with water, dry them out just a little bit, and then while this paint is still wet, you can kind of blend in what you just did. And just remember, like even with the drawing and the shading that we did in the last round, drawing and painting, it takes time. To make something look good and visually pleasing, the artist never gets there by rushing or taking shortcuts. A lot of this stuff there's no real shortcut to it. There's just only the hard work and elbow grease you have to put into a painting to make it look really nice. So now while I'm here, what I'm going to do is just add a little bit more black and get the darkest version of that black blue that I can get without it being black. And it pretty much comes out to looks like a gray blue. And I'm gonna do one more layer of that. It's gonna start to look really dark here. And that's good, that's what I want it to do, as we're trying to create this shadow. And as this circle goes out, it's gonna get lighter. So I'm okay with not adding any more paint and dragging out the paint that's already there, and even maybe letting it blend a little bit into this blue to give it a softer edge. And there you go, second layer for that. Now I'm gonna go back into the red, same concept. I'm gonna make it darker at the base right here and pull my darkness up so that it has a higher contrast against these edges. So starting with the deepest red I can make, pulling it right along that edge, pulling it up along the surface or the edge of the sphere. always keeping water inside of this watercolor area, because since I'm using so much red, it'll run out very quickly. Okay, and the second layer is basically, once again, to even out all the strokiness from that first layer. So it's okay if the top gets a little bit thinner of paint, as long as it has some paint in there. All right, and that concludes layer 2 for this whole piece. All right, so for this third layer, we're gonna actually start laying in a little bit of tone. To start make the shadows popping. And what I'm gonna do is, instead of adding black, I'm gonna think of the way a yellow object would start to shadow, and it might actually turn a little bit orange or brown. So I'm actually just gonna add a little bit of red to my yellow and create more of a brown color. And I'm gonna lay that in as my shadow. And it's a really light wash because I want to go progressively to know how much I want to add. And I'm going to always spread it downwards first into the shadow area. And I'm gonna cover it all the way to the bottom, because even the reflected light area will be darker than anywhere in the midtones. So I spread that all in and blended it, creating my first real layer of shadow. From there, I can then add just a touch of this black, adding in more yellow. A little bit of red. Because I want the darkest area to really be dark. So while the paint's still wet, I'm just very lightly adding in this darker, just right at this darkest point right here. Now there's a lot of water on this area now, and so I know that this is time to let this rest and move on to another area. But I just want to make sure it's in nice and even and smooth, so when it dries it gives me a good area to work with. is I'm gonna go back and darken this up again. So I'm gonna completely clean my brush, dry my brush, and then just really, really lightly, I'm gonna blend out from that edge so it's not a hard edge. Doing that dry brushing technique. And I don't want to really pull it up until it's dry because it will very quickly go into my mid-tone area, ruining all that nice light blend that I created. So I'm just very, very lightly drying my brush, getting a lot of the paint off of it, and then just softening up this edge. Okay, and that will be my second layer for the sphere. And the lighting is really bad, so you can't see it very clearly, and I apologize for that. All right, moving on to the blues. I'm gonna add just some vignette over here on the sides, using some of that already made tone that I had. But as soon as I lay it in, I'm gonna clean my brush, and then I'm gonna dry my brush, and I'm just gonna start working this out in a very light way. If an area looks too streaky, just lightly add a little bit of water in there. Don't add too much because it'll start to pull up the old paint too. But you just want to create a nice blend is the goal here. Alright, so you can see how I've created this blend over here on the side. I don't want to go overboard on it though. And I'm going to go back into here, and And I'm gonna start blending this area out just a tad bit. Creating a little bit larger, softer area. All right, that's good. And then for the background, I'm going to create the same vignette effect, but I'm going to pull it from the surface up. Be careful on this edge. I keep accidentally making it a little bit smaller each time. So it's because I'm not turning my paper the way I normally would, but it also is making my sphere look a little bit funky. Funky monkey.
Why do I and everyone I love pick people who treat us like we're nothing?
We accept the love we think we deserve.
And that's about as dark as I want it to get because I want to keep the brightness of the red at the top. So I'm gonna wet my brush, activate this line right here, clean my brush, keep activating it, clean my brush. I don't want to keep introducing too much water, but I need to activate this area before it dries.
What did you want?
I just want you to be happy.
If you add too much water, it'll pull the old paint off of what you've already done in, so or already put down, so be careful about that. And there you go, there's layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3. And you can see this is really starting to actually look like a three-dimensional object the more layers that I add in. Right here, there's some weird streakiness that I'm seeing on the camera, but I'm not really seeing it that much in real life or in person, so I'm actually just gonna go in here and just smooth that out a little bit to get rid of that. Sometimes looking at something through a lens or a camera helps the eye see things that it doesn't pick up when you're actually just looking at it. Okay, now you can see though, this is not perfect. This can go a little bit darker, which is what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna keep adding layer after layer after layer until I feel this is really looking dimensional. But you see the process. I go from one, then I go to the next, then I go to the next, and I let those areas dry, and then I go and I keep rotating over and over. So the rest of this video, I'm gonna time lapse it unless there's something important that I change or do differently, and you'll see this progress and build up more and more.